I've already covered some of the hitters I like the best as sleepers this draft season. Now let's get to the little trickier portion and some of those pitchers that are actually worth drafting. I really feel like this year more than ever, you want to target those mid to late rounds to get some pitchers that could perform because it's just really not that many pitchers worth targeting early. Way too much risk. And sure, there's risk with all starting pitchers, period. But here's some players who could deliver based on massive upside. One of my favorite pitchers all of last year was Brian Wu of the Seattle Mariners. I was big on that whole staff. Of course, we saw guys like George Kirby do his thing. Luis Castillo was pretty close to what he had been. Logan Gilbert took a step forward. Guy was forgotten about was Brian Wu, and a lot of that is because he kept missing time with injury, was back and forth off of the IL. The thing with Wu is that this isn't something I'm too worried about because it was just little nagging things, nothing serious that kept him out for a really long time. And also, this is not a guy who's just throwing his arm out because of velocity, because that's not what he does. This is somebody who predominantly throws his fastballs, and by that I mean his four-seamer and his sinker. He's mostly a two-pitch pitcher. If you look at it that way, those two pitches account for 75% of the pitches that he throws. And that is not a bad thing at all. More pitches doesn't necessarily mean more success, especially if you can master the pitches that you throw. And Wu has done that on his fastballs, a run value in the 95th percentile. Very effective at what he does. And that shows in an expected ERA of 2.72 from last year. And that resulted in a nice 2.89 ERA and a 0.90 whip. This is one of those pitchers I'm going to love to target because he just does not walk batters. A 2.8% walk rate, one of the best in the majors, obviously, and that's something that's going to continue. If you have the command, the control, then everything else just follows. Now, the reason he's not getting drafted higher is because he doesn't have great or gaudy strikeout numbers. And I really don't expect that to change much, especially when you're a guy who does somewhat pitch to contact, with the sinker involved. He can punch batters out, but it's not going to be elite. But again, you don't have to draft him in the top 100. Right now, he's going around pick 150 in early NFBC leagues. This is a perfect mid-rotation arm that you can secure and help your ratios. It's really hard to improve your whip and your ERA when you're this point in the draft. And if the Mariners kind of turn around things from last year where they were slightly disappointing, we were counting on a lot of wins from those Mariners pitchers that we had seen the year before, and that didn't happen. But still, this should be a competitive club. This isn't a bottom dweller or anything like that. So I feel like you should be okay in the wins category as well. Now, when it comes to young-ish pitchers who are still waiting to break out, waiting to see what happens, sometimes you just have to say, okay, enough is enough. It's not going to happen. And sometimes you just keep getting roped in, and that's what's happening with Mackenzie Gore for a third straight year for me. Let's see if this is the season. It looked like it was going to be last season because he got off to a great start, honestly, after the first 2 months, almost looking like an all-star. By the end of May, he had 11 starts under his belt. He had a 2.91 ERA, a 1.28 whip, and 34 strikeouts in his first 27 innings. Again, I was like, he arrived. He's breaking out. This is it. And it took a major step back, and I mean major. A few weeks later, he was being dropped left and right and forgotten about in fantasy leagues. But good news is a lot of people now have forgotten that he ended really strong, kind of the same way he began. In 5 September starts, 1.26 ERA, a 0.80 whip. And what it looks like is toward the middle of the season, he kind of messed around, maybe tinkered too much with his pitch mix. He tried to introduce his sweeper a little bit, did not work at all, and his changeup was getting pounded. And so he ditched the sweeper, went back to what worked. Changeup got a little bit better, and we saw the same results from earlier in the season. So this shows me not just for a short period of time, but again, beginning and end, he was able to be a very effective pitcher, and I think he can do it if he just settles on what works. And this is one of those few pitchers you can get outside right now, the top 200 picks, basically the very end of drafts, that does have pretty major strikeout upside. Another guy I'm probably going to talk about way too much is Spencer Arrighetti. I've already mentioned him on a couple of videos and haven't even done that many yet for this season. But Arrighetti is somebody that really is getting undervalued because you look at the season stats, it's not impressive, right? You look and you say a big deal, but it is a big deal if you look at what matters, and that's how he improved drastically from the beginning of the season to the end and how he finished the season. Now, if you are familiar with Arrighetti, you know what happened. The first few starts was horrible. He just got lit up. and then settle down. And like the second half of the season, he looked like a basically an ace. I mean, I don't think that's really even overstating it. In the second half of the season, a 3.18 ERA, a 1.17 WHIP. He was dependable and actually pretty good strikeout rate overall for the season. 27% K rate. That's solid. And that actually, stayed throughout. It was pretty consistent. Even when he wasn't great, he was still punching batters out. And on a team like the Astros, definitely a chance to get a fair amount of wins. Arrighetti is a guy who has a very complicated pitch mix here. At least 5 pitches, he throws 8% or more for 10% or more of the time. And so, again, still working on what is best in what situation. This comes with experience, comes with age. And again, this was a guy in his first season as a major league pitcher. It takes time to figure things out. He definitely figured out in the second half. So that has me very bullish on him going into this season. Another second half success story was Bowden Francis of the Toronto Blue Jays. Another guy who kind of became a little bit of a trendy deep sleeper, at least in some expert and analyst circles that I run in. I've seen a lot of people thinking, hey, maybe this is a guy to latch on to. He earned that 5th starter job for Toronto, and that was a mistake. Anybody who actually drafted him or played him early in the season, because kind of like Arrighetti, he got lit up. Got demoted, came back mid-season, mixed bag, but again, something clicked in the second half after the All-Star break, and he was basically unhittable. In the final 65 innings in the second half of the season, 1.80 ERA and a 0.60 whip. And this is also the strength of the fact he just doesn't walk batters, a 5.4% walk rate. So why is Francis being so overlooked based on how dominant he was toward the end of last season? A part of it is, we know we don't want to get sucked into recency bias, a guy who just has 2 good months basically, doesn't have a track record to fall back on, not a big name prospect or pitcher or anything like that. Not a great team, let's face it, Toronto. And also, kind of like a lot of the pitchers I'll talk about here, not a lot of strikeouts. You're not getting a lot of highlights here. The strikeout rate was, it was at average, league average, let's just say, and a 10.3% swinging strike rate. This shows it's not like he's just missing a lot of bats in general. So you're not getting a ton of strikeouts, but you guy who has such good control and showed how dominant he can be. Yeah, I'm in always on trying to help my ratios, especially if I get toward the end of my draft. So I'm going to buy into what we saw toward the end of the season, and I think Francis could be a bargain. Which leads me to another very similar type of pitcher. It's Cody Bradford for the Texas Rangers. This guy who managed to somehow get by with a fastball that is under 90 miles per hour velocity. And this guy is maybe the next Jamie Moyer, a lefty who's just soft tossing and yet continues to eat up innings and get guys out. Despite not blowing anybody away with his fastball, that fastball came up with a run value of plus 10 last year. And Bradford basically had half a season's worth of starts because he missed some time on the injured list after looking great in his first couple of starts. And then as soon as he came back from the IL, he looked great again down the stretch. So I'm buying into it because he obviously knows what to do to fool hitters. And no, you're not getting a high strikeout rate here either, but it's good enough. I mean, we're not talking about something that's in the teens, it's not going to hurt you. What you are getting, and I'd say that if you are in a league that does use quality starts instead of wins, Bradford actually gives you a little bit more value. 8 quality starts out of 13 attempts last season. So that's why when I talk about a pitcher like Bradford, I'm not putting him in the breakouts. He's not a guy I think has massive ceiling for fantasy because he's not going to punch out too many guys. But I will say dependable, help you with your ratios, not going to hurt you. It's pretty nice just to be able to draft a guy like that and set him toward the back end of your rotation. And speaking of that rotation, I'm not worried about Bradford not being part of it. I know some people look at the talent they have with the Rangers. He may be on the outside looking in, maybe the 5th or 6th guy. I look at the Rangers rotation right now. I'd be surprised if any of these guys don't end up with a little IL next to their name by the end of the season. And look, sure, Bradford could be included in that too, but man, there's a lot of risk here. I'm sorry. I'm not assuming Jacob DeGrom is going to pitch anything close to 150 plus innings this year. What about the rest of those guys? Tyler Mahle, when's the last time he pitched for a prolonged period of time? Yeah, I think Bradford's probably the guy I feel the best about. Now let's talk closer. Some people just don't like drafting a closer super early because it's risky. I get it. So instead, you could take a chance on a guy late, guy who feel like is going to have that job going into the year. So I keep looking over and over again at Ben Joyce of the Angels. Now, in contrast to Cody Bradford, you want velocity? Yeah, you're definitely getting winner here with Joyce. It's all nines here. 99.9 mile per hour average on the fastball, 99th percentile. Yeah, it's the same guy I talked about him toward the end of last year. Is that one who's throwing a 105 mile per hour pitch in college. He's going to blow guys away with the heat. Okay, so throwing really hard doesn't always equal fantasy success and stats. But for Joyce's case, he's been pretty good so far. I know he did get a chance to nail down a few saves last year after the Angels traded Carlos Estevez. Only 4 saves in the second half, though. Part of that is because on September 10th, he did go on the IL with right shoulder inflammation. That's concerning for a guy who throws so hard because, yeah, that's the inherent risk here, right? Just talked about DeGrom. I mean, anybody who throws that hard, it is definitely possible. But again, I can't think of any pitchers who aren't a potential injury risk. So, look, all closers are just risky, period. Let's go with a guy who we know has the heat, can strike batters out, and should have the job going into this season. His ratios were really good. I mean, we didn't see a lot of him necessarily, but we're going to see a lot more this year. He's somebody who will not get himself into trouble too often and still a pretty favorable pitcher's park there. So I think Ben Joyce is a pretty nice bargain closer if you're looking for one toward the later part of your draft. And then back to the Rangers. As it stands right now, of course, free agency still could play out. Things could change in spring training, but they might be going into the season with the veteran Chris Martin as their closer. Every year it feels like we see somebody, a guy who's been a reliever, maybe a setup man, gets a random save here and there, doesn't really have experience as a closer, and just all of a sudden steps up and becomes that guy who gets you 20, 25 saves. It could be Martin this year. This is a guy who, across 9 major league seasons, has a total of 14 saves. Look, he's been used in high leverage situations, but never as the guy. Well, he might be the guy for the Rangers again, unless something changes. And I like that this is a very low risk pick. First of all, because he's basically free in drafts, not even getting drafted in a lot of early leagues, in NFBC, which is pretty deep. Even there, he's got an ADP of 400. And low risk because I don't think he will kill you, even if he doesn't wind up being the guy. A nice 26.1% K minus BB rate. That differential, mainly on the strength of the fact he does not walk batters. If you notice, that's kind of a thing I like to look at, pitchers who know how to control the strike zone. His strikeout rate has fluctuated, actually went down the last couple of years. It was in the 30s a couple of years ago and then went down to 23, back up to 27. It's good enough. It is fine for what you need it to be. He can get guys out, doesn't get himself into trouble, etc. Look, if he winds up being the closer, this could be a very nice late last round value pick. You're going to have plenty more sleeper picks and breakouts for pitchers and hitters, etc. Keep it locked here. If you didn't catch that hitter sleeper video that I mentioned earlier, well, here it is.